All right, we are about to go live.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Using gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other nefarious tactics, the Republican Party has manipulated our electoral system to maintain as much control as possible despite being a party in the minority. Liberal Dan Radio seeks to change that, and I need your help in doing so. Liberal Dan Radio has partnered with Levelfield to help us use tools that are typically only available to big money donors. When you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution, it will encourage other voters to reach out to their legislators to pass legislation to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, and target elected officials who refuse to protect the vote. Every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot, and that ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions.
And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's area code 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. If you're also listening live, you can join us in the chat room like Bringing It Boy has already done at blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan. Sign in with your free blogtalkradio.com account, and you can ask questions in that chat. Or if you're watching live on YouTube, because you just want to see my, wonderful face, shing, you can also go to youtube.com/liberaldanradio and leave your comments, questions in that live chat as well. And if you're listening after the live broadcast, you can always leave your comments, questions, concerns, etc. on the show thread at liberaldan.com, at facebook.com/liberaldan, at liberaldanradio on Twitter, or youtube.com/liberaldanradio. Go to the episode page for the live stream, and you can leave your comments there as well. And remember to please like and subscribe to the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. It's one of the best ways that you can help me grow as a channel. So I would appreciate that very much. I made sure to like it from my other YouTube account. So, hey. Wait, I'm sorry. That's Donald's line.
It is what it is.
Thank you, Donald. Anyway, so I had a very busy day at work today, so I wasn't able to do, I actually went longer than what I would normally work for because we had to do something after hours, which means the time that I normally would spend prepping for the show, I didn't have time prepping for the show. And when that happens, because every time that happens, guess what? You see me say, hey, it's open line. So we're going to talk. And now I have plenty of stuff that I can always talk about, but if you want to call in and talk about whatever, or bring up things in chat, like sometimes Bringing It Boy and others will do, that we could discuss anything that you want to talk about, as long as I, have a sort of modicum of understanding of what's going on when it comes to what you brought up, and also considering potentially whether or not it's a reasonable topic to talk about, which I guess is another thing. Speaking of unreasonable things to talk about, apparently Mike Lindell, i.e. the My Pillow guy, has said that there's enough evidence to put 300 million Americans in jail for election fraud. 300 million Americans. We only have like 340 million people living in this country, and of that total of 340 million people, that includes individuals who are here who are not citizens. So what, everybody, I don't know, anybody under 15 can stay out of jail? Everyone else is going to jail, according to Mike Lindell? How Mike Lindell ever managed to become successful at making a pillow? Or maybe it's kind of like Ben Carson, where Ben Carson really excellent, brilliant brain surgeon and just used all of his brain power for that and then left nothing for anything else. Of course, for some reason, he got put in charge of HUD, which never made any sense to me. I mean, why would you put a doctor, a brain surgeon in charge of HUD? It was, again, that's just Donald Trump, I guess.
It is what it is.
Thank you, Donald. You're very, very helpful today. Let's see, what else? I have some other things that are trending. I don't know, it just seemed to have disappeared. I have a cat joining me in my room, so hopefully the cat will not bother us too much. Let's see, what else? There's something trending that I wanted to see. This Marsha Blackburn was trending. Let's see what ridiculousness that she said. Marsha Blackburn criticizes black judicial nominees' rap sheet of speeding tickets. Biden's Court of Appeals pick doesn't have a criminal record. He once got a ticket for going 5 miles over the speed limit, though. Nice. So yeah, having a 5 miles an hour over the speed limit is considered a rap sheet, according to Marsha Blackburn. Let's see. My children are being loud too. I don't know if you can hear them, but yeah, apparently according to Marsha Blackburn, having one traffic ticket makes somebody have a rap sheet, and we all know what that means. That's code for, what y'all think it is. What else? Oh, somebody else responded to Marsha Blackburn's, I guess, tweet or whatever, or tagging Marsha Blackburn, and it's a picture of two hats. One of the pictures is a Make America Great Again hat made in China and a Joe Biden campaign hat made in the United States of America, which, is pretty much just telling of everything you need to know about the hypocrisy of Donald Trump and, whether or not Donald Trump is somebody who you're going to trust to fight China, as it were. Hey, Rose. My cat's wanted to join, but my cat's not going to let me hold her and put her on camera because my cats don't like to be held, at least by me, maybe. Hey, Rose, come here. Come say hello to the people at Liberal Dan Radio. Woo! Woo! That's a Rose. That's my Rose. Hello, Rose. You're on camera now. You're famous. You're YouTube famous. You are the kitty. The only kitty to be on my YouTube channel. At least on this YouTube channel. I did have a blooper with one of my previous cats who managed to walk across my desk as I was making a video and made the camera fall and everything just went. Anyway, so there you go. You got Rose, some bonus coverage for the show, I guess. Get to see my kitty. Anyway, let's go ahead and take the first commercial break right now. Give some more people time to, get in here. Take calls as well. Again, I'm sorry, that's my phone number. 914-803-4131. Again, the phone number is 914-803-4131. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
Are you planning a trip to Disney soon? Do you want help avoiding spending mistakes and making the most of your vacation? Then check out BudgetEars.com, a new site devoted to helping you get the most mouse for your money. What kinds of tickets should you get? Is the dining plan a good deal for you? Should you stay on grounds or not? Should you buy park hoppers? Many other sites are filled with information about what other people like to do, but Budget Ears is geared to help you make the best decision for you. So check out BudgetEars.com or go to YouTube.com/BudgetEars and help make your trip the best it can be. BudgetEars.com is not a travel agency and it is not affiliated with the Disney Corporation or any of its holdings. In a world gone mad, one progressive will do a bad movie trailer guy impression to get you to listen to his show. There's only one thing that I like better than the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast. All right, Bill, that's enough of that. On the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast, you will hear an honest discussion of the day's issues, with some personal bits in between. You might even hear what the other side has to say, sometimes even in their own voices. So become one of the Liberal Dan family, because family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. To hear those bad impressions and more, tune into the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast. Talk from the left, that's right. And I think to myself, what a wonderful show. Yeah. If you enjoy Liberal Dan Radio, there's many ways that you can support the show. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can like me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter or TikTok. And you can become a Liberal Dan Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get a shout out. Higher levels get the opportunity to vote on what I do next on the podcast, the Minicast, or on YouTube. You can even buy commercial advertising or sponsor bits. So go to patreon.liberaldan.com and support the show today.
Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Deminox, host of The World According to Knox. It's time for Season 2, where I take you on another trip through my world. The world of movies, video games, pop culture, and more. Relate them to the world around you. Don't forget to leave a question for Marscat, and find me on Twitter by the handle XDeminox. That's the letter X like X-Men, DEMINOX. Now enjoy the rest of your podcast.
And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. Just fun things on Twitter. Somebody was like, please settle a debate. How many chuggas are there before the choo-choo? I say that there are 4 chuggas, which means that there are, so it's chugga, choo-choo, which would mean a total of 8 chuggas. So what else? We got somebody else in New Orleans business owners, whatever group. Hello, fellow lover. This should have, if I had time to make a Words of Reckoning Wisdom today, if I didn't already have something in, that I would download and produce, which I did, but I didn't have time to do it. Join us this Friday, January 14th at 11 a.m. at City Hall's Duncan Plaza and holding Mayor LaToya Cantrell and New Orleans Health Director Dr. Jennifer Ovegno accountable for their illegal, immoral, unconstitutional, and killer mandates. We need all hands on deck. And I put need and all closely. There's no space. It's like, we need all hands on deck. Thank you for helping us save ourselves and especially the children by attending and helping spread the virus. I mean, spread the word. Share, share, share. Help us stop this genocide. You matter. So, they meant spread the virus. Didn't they? So yeah, I'm sure they, even if they didn't mean spread the virus, guess what? That's what they gonna do. Apparently, it turns out last week we reported that Novak Djokovic was locked up, I guess, or whatever, or had his visa denied because of him refusing to take a shot. Then the court said, no, you can't do it. But then Australia said, well, still, no, we're not going to let you participate because, again, you have to follow the laws when you're here. So, I mean,
it is what it is.
I'm just going to abuse that button tonight. It is what it is. So, what's going on? So, what's going on with Liberal Dan Radio? Well, we still have I'm slacking a little bit on my videos. I'm going to have to start punching out more of the gerrymandering videos. I'm also put out a request on both Facebook, and Twitter. I was like, look, I clearly, voter suppression, gerrymandering, rules that are specifically created to keep certain voters from being able to cast a legal ballot that are labeled so-called voter ID laws. I think there are people who are talking about gerrymandering and who are making gerrymandering a big deal. And maybe, the fact that I'm also trying to target, maybe that makes people not necessarily want to, help out my cause that I'm trying to do, because of the fact that they might figure, well, let's donate to this other anti-gerrymandering cause, because that's I feel like it's more, established. That's fine. I understand that. But, maybe there's something that we can do as the podcast to continue, to kind of maybe take a narrower look, take a surgical look, and be like, let's dive down deep in this one particular issue. And if we can get this one particular issue dealt with, it would help. Hey, Daily News in the chat, welcome. In the chat on YouTube, thank you for joining us. I now have a second like on the video. Yay! Anyway, so maybe there's something that, you might specifically feel needs to be targeted, maybe a specific legislator that's standing in the way of passing, meaningful legislation to help prevent states from discriminating against certain sets of voters. Maybe we could, do that and make it a more surgical targeting of what's going on. And I'm looking for people's advice, because if you're going to be donating to a cause, I want to be able to make the cause be something that you want to donate to. So I'd love to hear your ideas as to what we might want to do. What else is Liberal Dan Radio up to? Well, some of the reason why I didn't have time to put too much into planning this show is that I'm planning 2 other shows that are coming up. I'm not ready to announce yet my potential guest that I might be having sometime within the next month. I'm going to be very excited. I'm going to be very excited. Ripley says in the chat, I don't believe voter suppression is a thing. Change my mind. Let's see. And also, we'll get to that in a second. So I'm not ready to discuss that extra special surprise guest. That if it happens, I'm going to be thrilled. It'll be great. It's going to be an amazing show. I'm going to love that show. It might be I'm predicting that it might very well be the best episode of Liberal Dan Radio that has ever aired over the last 10 years. That's how good this guest is going to be. But I'm not announcing who it is yet because I don't want to jinx it. But on the other side, we also have somebody who is potentially going to be coming on the show, and I'm more than happy to announce this particular guest, and this guest will be coming on in 2 weeks. Ken Good, a Texas bail attorney and board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. And he's worked closely with lawmakers and other individuals on bail matters. He is going to offer his perspective on impact that bail funds have on public safety. And because one of the concerns that he has is that there are people or organizations that will get together and post bail for individuals. And what if those individuals then go and do something bad? What if there's, so we're gonna discuss those things as to why I guess he believes in the bail system, why he's against some of these, the bail project. So we'll see what happens with that, and we'll see. It should be interesting. I have a feeling we're going to disagree on a bunch, but again, I don't just have people on my show who agree with me. I don't want to echo chamber. I want to keep things fresh and lively, and I want you to hear both sides of the argument if there are both sides to be had, and I want you to see how 2 people who might disagree on some things might be able to reach an agreement or reach some common ground on particular issues. So that's why I like to have people who might not always agree with me, be they on the right or the left. I mean, I've discussed issues like the prison abolition movement, and I don't believe that prison should be absolutely gotten rid of. Although sometimes when people discuss prison abolition, it's more of they hear the slogan, and the slogan isn't a perfect example of what many people say. Like when people talk about defunding the police, it's not eliminating all funding from police in most cases. In most cases, it's eliminate some funding in areas where police shouldn't be doing and putting that funding in other places, either in preventive measures to try and stop crime from happening to begin with, or put somebody, if drugs are a cause in an area, as to why a crime happens. Well, maybe put some into prevention of the spread of drug addiction, in which case you might see less crime and you don't have to worry as much about arresting if you're stopping it before it happens. Because police many times are just reactionary and not proactive when it comes. And there are some examples of police being proactive, and that's fine. But anyway, so let's see. I want to see exactly the wording that's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com, which is the website, that I have, that I want everybody to go to. So we'll read from that, and I'll get to Ripley. I'll get to your question in a second. So for over 10 years, the GOP has implemented a strategy that seeks to retain power despite it waning in popularity. The GOP coup has implemented via gerrymandering so-called voter ID laws and stacking the courts to uphold these laws and make challenges against them more difficult. I have gone over, if you watch the GOP coup video series, one of those videos deals with the amount of judges that Donald Trump got to name and the amount of judges that Barack Obama was prohibited from naming because the Republicans in Congress and the Senate specifically prevented him from doing so, thus allowing Donald Trump to be able to stack the courts in the favor of the Republicans, despite the fact that Barack Obama should have gotten to name a bunch of them. So that's what I mean by stacking the courts in the favor of the Republicans, especially when it comes to the so-called voter ID laws containing many provisions unrelated to showing identification to vote. There you go. So if you watched, you understand. You understand why. You saw the numbers of the numbers of judges that Obama got to name in his last term versus the other people who got to name judges, and then see how Donald Trump benefited from being able to name so many more judges than he might have normally been able to name. So, anyway, Ripley doesn't believe in voter suppression. He doesn't believe it's a thing. Changed my mind, he says. So, voter suppression. Let's get started. Usually I don't talk about voter ID when I talk about voter suppression. I talk about the so-called voter ID laws, because many of these voter ID laws contain provisions in them that have nothing to do with the requirement to show an ID to cast a ballot. Louisiana has a voter ID law, and I never complain about it because it's reasonable. You have the ability to get an ID, and the ID is provided for you for free if you don't have one. It's a simple. So there's no poll tax. There's no de facto poll tax. There's no. It's not created in and of itself. It doesn't prevent anybody from casting a ballot who should be able to cast a ballot. But what these Republicans will add things into these so-called voter ID laws that have nothing to do with the requirements to have an ID, that changes other things. Like, for example, if you watch this series on the GOP coup, I talk about the North Carolina so-called voter ID law, which contained other provisions, and some of those other provisions, the Republican legislators in the state of North Carolina did a kind of a survey as to what type of, or study on what type of methods of voting were used by particular groups of people. And they determined that black people were more likely to use, voting A and B, whereas white people might be more likely to use C, D, and E, or whatever. So what they wound up doing was eliminating A and B, specifically because it's the type of voting that black people utilize more. Now, there was no claim, there was no assertion made that by eliminating these types of voting methods that you're somehow strengthening the ballot, you're somehow making it so that people are able to cast a meaningful ballot and while preventing other people from not. There was nothing intentionally fraudulent or unethical or risky about those methods of voting, except for the fact that they were risky to the Republican Party. So that's why the judge overturned that law, because the judge basically said that the Republicans in the legislature of North Carolina targeted black voting methods with surgical precision. And that's why they did it. So that's why it was overturned. That's why the law was overturned. And it was overturned twice, I believe, for pretty much the same reasons. What other ways? But there are some voter ID laws that are made that eliminate particular kinds of IDs that can be used, that again specifically target voters who might vote a certain way. Like Native Americans might be more likely to vote for Democrats than Republicans. In, I think, North Dakota it was. I'm fairly certain it was North Dakota. You had a situation where they basically said that you can't use a voter ID, like a driver's license, if that driver's license does not have a street address on it. I.e., if it had a P.O. box on it, you couldn't use it. Here's the problem. Many Native Americans in the state of North Dakota live on these reservations that don't have a street address, because they live on these, they don't have regular streets as normal as you might normally have. And because of that, they use post office boxes. But they're still legitimate voters. They're still people who have the right to cast a ballot in the elections. But because the state Republicans were like, well, we want to prevent these people from voting, so we're going to eliminate the type of ID that they use. Was nothing wrong with their ID. Their ID was valid. It was used previously, and there was nothing fraudulent about them using their P.O. boxes. But they just decided, well, we're just going to make the law this way, and it's going to make it harder for these people to cast a ballot because they don't have street addresses. Which also makes me question, well, then how does a homeless person vote? If they don't have a street address, they should still be able to cast a ballot because they're citizens. If they're a citizen and they're homeless, they shouldn't lose their right to vote. North NK law only says you need res ed addresses. I don't know what that's. NK law only says you need res ed addresses to vote. There was I think recently, I think in 2020 sometime, maybe sometime in 2021, a settlement took place between North Dakota and the tribes to basically work out a way that they could get legal voter IDs to enable them to vote. But that the damage was already done because it was implemented prior to a Senate election, and the Republican won the Senate election by, I think, less than the amount of people that were prevented from casting a ballot. So the damage was already done. And then once you're an incumbent, the power of the incumbency is very strong, and it's harder to get an incumbent out. It can happen, obviously, but it's much harder to get an incumbent out because they tend to get more entrenched. But the point is that they specifically made an unnecessary law, and the purpose of the law, North Dakota law says you can also request other ways to vote if you don't want it this way. But it's not other ways it's not ways to vote in North Dakota. It's just the fact that they had a valid ID. They had a driver's license. They had a valid state-issued driver's license that's supposed to be able to be used to allow them to vote, until they changed the law and said, no, you can't vote with these licenses anymore. They were prevented from casting a ballot. Let's see. I'll go. Let's see. What website is that on, Ripley? We'll look it up. State voting laws requirements. Let's see. North Dakota. I mean, this is it's usvotefoundation.org is what I'm looking at, but all of this is like type of voting, but it doesn't necessarily say voting with an ID, what the type of ID that can be used. That's what I'm talking about here, Ripley. The type of ID that can be used. North Dakota Native American voting ID. Let's see. Let's go to the long-standing Spirit Lake Tribe versus Jaeger. Despite a nationwide outcry during the 2018 election cycle, North Dakota's discriminated voter ID law remained on the books. While the cameras turned their attention elsewhere, the fight to protect our freedom and vote continues in the courts. Finally, in February 2020, the Secretary of State agreed to settle 2 federal voting rights lawsuits brought by 2 tribes and several individual voters. So let's see. For the last 4 years, we have fought hard to protect the voice of Native voters in North Dakota. The ability to vote should never depend on home ownership or whether the government has assigned your home an address. That's the problem I'm talking about here, Ripley. And are you looking at ways to vote, or are you looking at whether or not an ID is allowed or not? That's what I'm questioning. What you're looking at, Ripley. Are you talking about whether or not an ID is allowed, or are you talking about, you know, different ways that people are allowed to vote? Because, I mean, we could talk about the different ways that people are allowed to vote. But we can also talk about other issues that, you know, that come up with, you know, the Georgia law with the bottles of water. Like, if my wife and I lived in Georgia, and let's say my wife was waiting in a long line to cast a ballot, and my wife sent me a text message that said, "I'm really thirsty, can you bring me a bottle of water?" Under the law in the state of Georgia, my doing so would be a violation of the law. I could be breaking the law simply by bringing my wife a bottle of water. Now, you might say, well, there are people who might use the bottles of waters to campaign by putting like a campaign sticker on a bottle of water and then handing it out to people in line saying, hey, here's your bottle of water, and that just happens to say vote for so-and-so. Well, there's already a law in the books that prevents this. If somebody is doing that in the state of Georgia, they already had methods that you already were violating the law if you were handing out campaign paraphernalia, including bottles of water with stickers that say vote for so-and-so on them, went to people waiting in line to cast a ballot. So this specific law in Georgia was made because they wanted to make people waiting in lines more uncomfortable as they're casting a ballot. Average, if we go to, if I can type correctly, that would be nice. For some reason, I keep wanting to type the number 4. Voter, wait, line, Georgia, race, let's see. Boo. Kathy spotted the long line of voters as she pulled into the Christian City Welcome Center at 3:30, ready to cast her ballot in June 9th primary election. Hundreds of people were waiting in the heat and rain outside the Tree Line Complex in Union City, an Atlanta suburb with 22,400 residents, nearly 88% of them black. She briefly considered not casting a ballot, but decided to stay. By the time she got inside more than 5 hours later, the polls had officially closed and the electronic scanners were shut down. Poll workers told her she'd have to cast a provisional ballot, but they promised that her vote would be counted. I'm angry again, I'm frustrated again, and added emotion, which is anxiety. So why do these areas in Georgia, why do you have to wait 5 hours to vote in Georgia if you're in a black community? But if you're in a white community, you have to wait less. Voters per polling place. So Forsyth County in 2012 had 4,000 voters in the polling place. It went up to 8,156. Cherokee County, 33,072, 4689. But statewide, the averages is 246 to 303. So the increase was much smaller statewide than in other counties. Georgia law sets a cap of 2,000 voters for a polling place that has experienced significant voter delays, but that limit is rarely, if ever, enforced. Our analysis found that in both majority black, majority white neighborhoods, about 9 of every 10 precincts are assigned to polling places with more than 2,000 people. So basically, you know, you have a lot of voters in the state of Georgia that are being told that they have to sit in a long line, 5-hour line to vote in a primary, not even a general election. And if they get thirsty, there's nothing that they can do. Let's say they brought a bottle of water with them, anticipating that they might have to wait some, but the line takes longer than they thought, so they want another bottle of water. Nobody can give it to them. Ripley, I'm sorry, but you're the one who's wrong. You say false. Only the people running the polls are not allowed to hand out water. That is absolutely not true. Let's go look up Georgia SB 202 is what I believe it's called. We're going to bring up the text of the law and we're going to read it for you. So you will be more informed after this episode of Liberal Dan Radio Talk from the Left. That's right. Okay. Control F. Water. No person shall solicit votes in any manner by any means or method, comma, nor shall any person distribute or display any campaign material, second clause, third clause, nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food and drink, to an elector. Nobody is allowed to give water to an elector. Not a single darn person can give, or nor shall anybody other than set up tables or booths which be cast within 150 feet of any outer edge of any building, or within a polling place, or within 25 feet of any voter standing in line to vote at any polling place. So if your line is 5 hours long, that expands the length of an area where people cannot give water. And again, it doesn't say no election workers can give water. It says no person, nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money, gifts, including but not limited to food and or drink to an elector. And that was added to the bill. That was part of the amendment to the bill. It's not just, I mean, I'm telling. Many conservatives have tried to make this argument to me, and they're all wrong because they're getting their information from the same places, and that place is not from the text of the legislation, Section 33 of the law as passed. Now, this code shall not be construed to prohibit a poll officer from distributing materials as required by law, which are necessary for the purpose of instructing electors, or from distributing materials from the Secretary of State, which are solely for the purpose of encouraging voter participation, or from making available self-service water from an unattended receptacle to an elector while waiting in line to vote. But here's the deal. If you're in a 5-hour line waiting 5 hours to vote, where's that water going to be compared to you standing in line for 5 hours? There's no reason. There is no good reason. I can't say there's no reason. There's no good reason, no legitimate reason to prevent me from handing out a bottle of water to somebody waiting in line to vote. As long as I'm following all the other rules, as long as I'm not electioneering, I'm not campaigning to the people in line. If I'm sitting there, if I'm wearing a nondescript clothing, or if I'm wearing clothing that has nothing to do with anything that's on the ballot, and I'm just sitting there going, here's water, here's water, here's water. Thank you very much for voting for whoever it is you're going to vote for. Thank you for participating in doing your civic duty. If I give you a bottle of water, I'm now a criminal. Right? I now violated the law because I'm helping somebody get a drink of water. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And the only reason, and I said that originally there was no reason. The only reason to put it into place is because they know who waits in line, and they know who doesn't wait in line, and they want to make it more uncomfortable for the people who are waiting in line. And the people who are more likely to be waiting in long-ass lines are black voters who tend to be more democratic. And they say, well, we just lost the state of Georgia. Joe Biden won Georgia. Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won Georgia. So we need to, instead of changing our policies to become more attractive to the voters of Georgia, we're going to just make it harder for specific voters to come out and vote. And as such, make it easier for us to win. So no, Ripley, you're absolutely 100% wrong. You are not okay to hand out water. It is a violation of the law to do so, and it's a ridiculous part of the law. And I don't know what you're saying. You keep saying false. That's not what the law says. I'm literally reading what the law says. Literally reading it verbatim from legiscan.com/Georgia/text/SB202/2021. I'm literally reading it from the law right now. Again, I'll read it again in case you need me to read it for you again. Nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food or drink to an elector. Period. That's what the law says. So I cannot come up to you if you're thirsty in a 5-hour line waiting to vote. I can't come up to you and give you a bottle of water. That's a violation of the law. And it's ridiculous. Again, if that bottle of water happens to have a sticker on it that says vote for so-and-so, that's a violation of the law because you're electioneering at that point. So you can't give out that specific bottle of water. But this law, I said this before in the podcast, this law, PolitiFact doesn't say, where does PolitiFact say I'm wrong? Email me, liberaldanradio@gmail.com. PolitiFact, Georgia, water. PolitiFact, the facts about Georgia's ban on food, water. Josh Holmes stated on March 28th, a Georgia law has not criminalized giving people bottles of water. It pertains to political organizations. PolitiFact says that is mostly false. If your time is short, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed sweeping elections bill into law. It included some controversial provisions about absentee and in-person voting. One provision of the new law includes a ban of giving away water or food to voters within a certain distance of voters or polling sites. The new law allows poll workers to set up self-service water stations for voters to use. Now, it allows them to do so. It doesn't require them to do so. It allows them to do so. Now, on the site, Chris Wallace asked, why on earth, if Americans are willing to wait on hours to vote, would you make it a crime for people to come and give them a bottle of water? Josh Holmes, former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell, came on and says, I heard a couple times of this program that the idea that they've criminalized people giving bottles of water. They have not. What the statute is absolutely clear. They're preventing political organizations from giving people things. But that's not what the statute says. The statute does not say that. The statute does not limit it to political organizations. It just says people. What Georgia bill? PolitiFact. What Georgia's SB 202 says about food and water. Again, it then cites the rules. Holmes is correct that poll workers can set up self-water stations. However, during the show, he misled when he said the law doesn't criminalize giving away water. The law makes it a misdemeanor to give away food or water within 100 feet of the outer edge of a polling place or building or within 25 feet of any voter in line. Violations of this law are punishable by up to a year in jail and a $1,000 fine. While people other than poll workers can give away food or water, they have to adhere to those boundaries to avoid breaking the law. So no, Ripley, PolitiFact doesn't say that I'm wrong. PolitiFact clearly says that I'm right. I don't know how you can misread that. Our ruling, Holmes says that Georgia law has not criminalized giving people bottles of water, that it pertains to criminal organizations. SB 202 makes it a crime for people, and not just people from political organizations, to hand out food or bottles of water within 150 feet of a polling place or within 25 feet of any voter standing in line. The only kernel of truth is that the law has a sentence which allows poll workers to make available self-service water from an unattended receptacle to an elector waiting in line to vote. But just because poll workers can make self-service water available doesn't mean that they are required to come up with a way to make water accessible to voters in every line and every polling site. Also, people could hand out water or food to voters outside of the boundaries, which has to be 150 feet away from the polling center, the building where the polling is taking place, plus a 50-foot bubble away from any voter, 25 on each side. So there's basically this long 50-foot corridor that you're not allowed in. So I have to leave my place in line if I want something to vote and hope that the person lets me back in line because I wanted something to drink. So you have to hang out 26 feet away from the voter, be like, I have water if you want it. It's ridiculous. It's just one of many laws that the Republicans have passed in order to specifically to make it more uncomfortable for people to cast ballots, and specific people to cast ballots because they want to make sure that they can, stop certain people. And we all know who they are. They don't want black people voting. There's been many examples. You had the North Carolina law, which surgically targeted black voters and the way that black people vote and said, hey, we're going to cut these out. Why? Not because they were more rife with fraud, not because that they were problematic in any way, except for the fact that it's just what black people tended to use. And that's why they cut them out. So let's go back to Georgia SB 202, because there are other things in SB 202 that are problematic as well, that are not just pertaining to water for standing in line. Let's see. The elections in Georgia are administered by counties, but that can lead to problems for voters in counties with dysfunctional election systems, counties with long-term problems of lines, which you create. The state creates the problems by shoving all of the precincts into those voting centers. There are things in the law that allow the Georgia to overrule what a county board of electioners, an elected board of election commissioners, are allowed to do. So the state government can basically say, we don't like the decision that this Democratic county made when it came to their election, so we're going to step in and overrule them. We're not going to step in and overrule anything that are done in the conservative-run counties. They're not going to do that at all. Let's see. And it's selected by a partisan vote of the legislature, which is already gerrymandered in such a way to that even though the fact that the majority of the state voted for Democrats in this last election, I'm sure that there's no way for Democrats under the way that the current lines are drawn to be able to retake control without a swarm of people either moving to different districts or to get in so many of people out to vote. And then, people are going to, there must be fraud because more people came out to vote. What'd you have? If you watched the GOP coup series, you saw there were many examples in Georgia before the election, like when Kemp was running for governor against Stacey Abrams, and he was the Secretary of State, and he made decisions like cutting off tens of thousands of people off the voting list. And look, if you're not supposed to be on the voting list, sure, you should be cut off, but you should be verifying that those people are really not on the voting list. So you had tens of thousands of people who were eligible to vote, who never left the county that they lived in, who were purged from the rolls. And they keep purging people from the rolls, casting a wide net, which creates many false positives. When you have so many false positives, you should be required by the law to be able to, dot all your I's and cross all your T's to make sure that anybody removed from the voting rolls are either dead or have moved out of the state, specifically, or even if it's moved to a different county, just to verify, hey, you moved. But they've made it so these things can't get forwarded. They're making it harder to get an absentee ballot. There's nothing. Florida made it harder to get an absentee ballot as well. Look, if you're dead set against wanting to ever admit that there's no voter suppression going on, I don't know what there is that I'm going to do to convince you. I'll basically say this: if you're going to still insist, despite me reading from PolitiFact, despite me reading from the law, the text of the law itself, if you're still going to insist that I'm wrong about the Georgia law, then I'm not going to be able to convince you. There's no way that I can convince you of voter suppression, because if you deny that if me and my wife lived in Georgia and she was waiting in line and my wanting to bring her a bottle of water to help her, hydrate while she waited in a long ass line, if that would be against the law. And if you're telling me I'm wrong, then you're wrong, and you're not going to be able to be you're not going to be able to be convinced otherwise, because you're gonna bury your face in the sand like an ostrich. You're gonna fight whatever I say on this, because you're more concerned with proving me wrong at that point, with me being wrong and trying to mislead people that I'm wrong, or that the people who are worried about these laws are wrong, than you are about whatever. Then there's also the fact voter suppression also takes place when you suppress the power of one's vote. And if you've watched my GOP or the Stop the Coup video series in and of itself talking about gerrymandering. Are there blue states that do gerrymander and that do deny the people in their states who are Republicans the power of their vote that they deserve to have in Congress? Yes, absolutely. And I'm being as nonpartisan as I can be with the reporting of that video, of that video series. But there's a big but. There's still an advantage. The Republican Party still has an advantage with how the lines are drawn, and how right now there's only like a 3 or 4 seat advantage, but we've only gone through the states that have 7 seats. I'm still have to do 8 seats and beyond, and we're going to see just how badly the Republican Party has gerrymandered the lines in such a way to make sure that the people who get to vote, like in Louisiana, again, 6 districts in Louisiana, 6 congressional districts. There's 1 congressional district that's represented by a Democrat. There are 5 congressional districts that are represented by a Republican. Now, in Louisiana is at least 33% black, has at least 33% registered Democrats. So, and if you look at the elections of the last presidential election, or the results of the last presidential election, you'll see that a third of the state supported Joe Biden. Well, if a third of the state supported Joe Biden, it's probably like reasonable to say that a third of the state would have wanted to have a Democratic congressman. But now only a sixth of a state, or half of those people, are represented. The voices of Louisiana Democrats in Congress are half of what it should be because of the way that the lines are drawn in the state of Louisiana. And in reality, if you look at the governor's race, we have a Democratic governor. The last governor's race, half the state voted for Democrat. Half the state voted for Republican. Almost exactly down the line. It was like 51-48. In that case, there potentially should be 3 seats representing Democrats and 3 seats representing Republicans. But that's not how I'm doing my analysis of the states. I'm doing my analysis of the states based off of presidential election outcomes, but still means that Louisiana should have at least 2 congressional seats that are represented by Democrats, but we don't. We only have 1 because they packed all of the Democrats, especially a lot of the black voters in the state of Louisiana, into this one meandering district that goes from New Orleans to Baton Rouge and just kind of goes up the river, just twisting and turning to cover, like it takes me an hour and a half. Potentially, I think it'll take me 2 hours for me to drive from one part of the district to the other, with 6 districts. Meanwhile, I could get to 2 other districts much more quickly. That doesn't mean that a hard-lined, well, let's just carve the 6 into 6 equal area places without those crazy lines. That doesn't mean that your state will be represented well either, because I think Connecticut does that, and Connecticut is a Democratic state that does not represent its Republican voters as well as it should in Congress, because it doesn't have I don't think they have a single Republican seat in Connecticut, just like I think in not Nebraska. In Oklahoma, I don't think there's a single Democratic seat, even though there should be at least 1. So that's just another way that voices are suppressed, that voters are suppressed, because their ability to cast ballots and have their say heard by Congress is reduced. It's a constitutional right to be able to address your concerns to Congress. It's a constitutional right to vote. It literally says several times in the Constitution, the right to vote. So if they're talking about the right to vote shall not be denied by gender, the right to vote should not be defined by or denied to anybody based off of racial issues. So that means that there's a right to vote. If we have a right to vote, people shouldn't be fighting on figuring out ways to how to water down somebody's vote power, and also making sure not trying to prevent people from casting ballots. We should want everybody who can cast a ballot to cast the ballot. And if the other side wins, fine. Fairly, fine. If you manage to convince more people to elect your people who will enact the laws that you want in a fair system, sure. But it's not a fair system. And the ridiculous thing is that the Republicans are the ones who are screaming election fraud, because they want to basically try and say that it's the Democrats that are doing the election fraud, when it's the Republicans that are doing it. The Republicans are committing election fraud. Anyway, let's go ahead and take our second commercial break. We'll come back. We do have our California friend, I think, on the phone, so we'll get to you as well. But let's go ahead and take this second commercial break. We'll get to that phone call. I wasn't even looking at the Blog Talk Radio page. I was looking at all the other pages. Anyway, 914-803-4131. It's 914-803-4131. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
Greetings. This is Nimbus Yosh, host of the Percy Podcast. What is the Percy Podcast? Well, it's pretty much the smoothest talking host you'll ever hear in your life, talking about all kinds of things. Political things, nerdy things, fun things, not so fun things. Go ahead, give a listen, and follow at the Percy Podcast for more updates and information. Why not sit back and take a listen to one of the best podcasts you'll ever hear, and no one else will. Catch you on the tunes.
Do you want to set money aside for a rainy day? Do you want to open an account that will give you a savings bonus each month? What if I told you that you can get both and have a chance to win $10 million? YADA is an FDIC-insured bank, and when you go to yada.liberaldan.com, open an account, and make your first deposit, you will get 100 entries into the next weekly drawing. You will also get entries each week you have a balance. So go to yada.liberaldan.com. That's YOTTA.liberaldan.com. Using gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other nefarious tactics, the Republican Party has manipulated our electoral system to maintain as much control as possible despite being a party in the minority. Liberal Dan Radio seeks to change that, and I need your help in doing so. Liberal Dan Radio has partnered with Levelfield to help us use tools that are typically only available to big money donors. When you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution, it will encourage other voters to reach out to their legislators to pass legislation to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, and target elected officials who refuse to protect the vote. Every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot, and that ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions.
And we are back with Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right. You want to join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131. 914-803-4131. In chat, Bringing a Boy, you said, in Blog Talk Radio chat, he said, definition, summary of court packing plan, summary definition. The court packing plan by the nickname was given to journalists by the unsuccessful Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937 that was proposed by FDR. Again, that's court packing. I mentioned court stacking in my Stop the Coup page, stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. So that, I don't know. I mean, there is an issue of court packing, and there's the potential whether or not there's been discussions as to whether or not Joe Biden should work with the simple majority in Congress that they have to pack the court and be able to add more seats, because the number of seats in the Supreme Court isn't fixed; it's determined by law. And I was frankly surprised. One of the things that I predicted I was wrong about, I was frankly surprised that Donald Trump and the Republicans, when they had control of the House and Senate and the presidency, that they just didn't go ahead and create 3 new seats at least and then just pack the court that way. But no, I'm talking about stacking the court. I'm talking about when they blocked Barack Obama from being able to name his Supreme Court nominations and other high court, appeals court, appellate court nominations, and instead Donald kept it for Donald Trump to be able to to be able to name those people, thus packing the court with Republican nominees. Anyway, so we're going to go out to our friend. Sorry, I didn't see that you had called in because I didn't have the page up, but welcome back to the show. Thank you for calling in.
Oh, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
How are you?
I'm doing all right, I guess. It's been a long day, a long week. Wait, let me play the sound.
It is what it is.
Thank you, Donald. Anyway, so.
Well, you know, we're just getting day by day. I hope the rest of your week goes better.
Hopefully. So yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes. So go ahead.
I'll
make your point.
Positive thoughts. Positive thoughts.
Yes.
So, the couple of things that you brought up. I'm trying to think now. As far as the voting laws, there's like 34 laws that Democrats are saying are voter suppression laws that were passed in red states, I guess.
Right.
But did you know that New York had one of those food bans and water bans? It's actually called a meat ban. What is it? Hang on here. Meat, food, drink, or any other tobacco, refreshments, or provisions to a voter at a voting place, a polling place. But now they're repealing that, or I guess they just repealed it, but that's been on the books like forever. So New York, Montana, and then recently Georgia. But yeah, they had those laws too, and they made it a crime as far as, you know, it's a misdemeanor, but it's also, you can get a fine and up to a year in jail if you're found guilty of, you know, distributing those things. And that's a totally Democrat state.
Well, it is, but you can't just you can't just like when I go vote, like I usually go early voting anyway, but when I've voted, my specific precinct doesn't have a lot of people voting in it, so there's never really a line, so it's not something that necessarily affects me.
But New York, New York has lines all the time.
I'm because I've never lived in New York. I've visited New York, so you know, I guess there are people who have waited, you know, hours in line to vote. Now, was the ban on water being handed out, was that something that was being enforced? You know, maybe it was on the books, but there are a lot of laws on books that aren't necessarily enforced, or maybe are specifically. Maybe they were like, hey, you know, we're only going to enforce this on certain people in certain circumstances. Like, for example, if they're handing out bottles of water, you know, saying, hey, here's a bottle of water, vote for Joe Schmo, so-and-so, whatever. As opposed to, you know, Georgia, which seems to want to pass this type of law now. Now, look, if you would have told me, if you would ask me before they, I guess, overturned it, was the New York ban on water reasonable? No, it's not. You know, I'll fully, you know me. I'll point out examples where, you know, states get it wrong. When I talk about gerrymandering, I talk about all the people that gerrymander, not just the Republicans that gerrymander. I talk about everybody that gerrymanders. I'll say that the people in Connecticut who are Republicans do not have the say that they should in Congress because they're not adequately represented by the way that the states are drawn. I fully will say that. Why?
So would it be?
Because
it's true. Would it be voter suppression then when? As far as the New York, their ban, there was commonly known as line warming ban, and so it was known. And New York, their statement here by one of their legislators was saying that New York is notorious for having incredibly long lines in select parts of the state that people wait in to vote. Myrie wrote in his legislative justification, indeed, last year long lines occurred during both early voting and election day voting. And this statute places an additional burden on voters and organizations by essentially prohibiting organizations from working to support voters while they may wait in line. And the statute, they signed it recently as far as they lifted it, that ban. So they're clear now, but it was on the books for a long time.
I'm just trying to furnishing money or entertainment to induce attendance at polls. Any person who directly or indirectly or by himself or through any other person in connection with or in respect of any election during the hours of voting on a day of general, special, or primary election gives or provides or causes to be given or provided or shall pay wholly or in part for any meat, drink, tobacco, refreshment, or provision to and for any person other than persons who are official representatives of the board of elections of political parties and committees of persons who are engaged as watchers, party representatives, or people working assisting the candidate, except any such meat, drink, tobacco, or refreshment provision having retail value of less than $1, which is given or provided to any person in a polling place without any identification, is guilty of a Class A misdemeanor. So even the New York law says that you can give out, if your bottle of water is less than $1, you can give out a bottle of water to somebody. Now,
if it's less than $1.
If I go buy a 24 pack of water for $5, how much is the unit price per bottle of water?
I don't know, but I just think that's really a weak argument to say that the voter suppression law
right.
was
But
I say that because people are smart enough to know that if they're going to wait in a long line, that they'll either bring something to drink with them, have it in the car, or something to that effect if they know that that's what they're going to. People are not stupid. You make it sound like people are stupid and they're going to wait in these long lines and just so they can vote, they'll just pass out because nobody can bring them any water. And it's like, well, you usually prepare for those things if you're an adult.
But regardless of that, but look, I'm fine with saying, look, just, I don't think you should be able to supply money to people at the polls. I don't think you should be able to, I don't think you should be able to give, non-food or water gifts to people at the polls. I don't think you should be able to electioneer at the polls. It's fine, prohibitions and those sort of things are fine and are not voter suppression. But to try and say that then the laws are similar, they're similarly worded. But because there was the prohibition, because there was that added little tidbit in the New York law that does allow for having things of retail value less than $1, it's not the same thing. You can give out bottles of water to people waiting in line in New York versus you can't give out bottles of water to people waiting in line in Georgia. Now, again, is the law needed? Are all the prohibitions? If I want to give larger bottles of water because the lines are really long, and I'm prohibited from doing so, is that reasonable? I don't think so. I think that, again, and you might say, well, people who are reasonable and smart might think ahead of time and bring with them bottles of water. But let's say I was a super smart person and I just had a backpack full of water. So I was like, I don't know how long this line is going to last. I don't know. So I'm just going to bring a backpack full of water. I have to sit there in line with my nice backpack full of water. And if somebody says to me, hey man, can I have a bottle of water? And if I'm in Georgia, I have to say, nah, man, sorry, I can't give you this water because guess what? It's against the law for me to do so. So is there any reason for the law to exist, for that provision of the law to exist? What logical? Were there any cited examples of people electioneering via giving out bottles of water to people in line in Georgia that was not already covered by existing electioneering laws? One. Was there one?
Yes, there was a taco truck that had pulled up and was giving free food away for the Democratic Party.
Okay.
At one of the polls. So they took that and they ran with it to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make a law that we can't have any food or drink until they've overreacted. But nevertheless, I mean, people are going to vote for who they're going to vote for, in my opinion. They're not going to get influenced by a taco.
I mean, I'm personally am not going to be influenced by anybody electioneering at the polls either. When I go to vote, my mind's made up. Nobody sitting there waiting online is gonna make me be like, I was gonna vote for this person, but now you've brought up this, last minute thing to me. Oh, I'm gonna change my mind. No, it's not
exactly.
It's not gonna happen. But
I agree.
If there are I'm seeing examples of where people in Georgia in taco trucks or other food trucks were bringing foods to people at the polls. Like there was a chefs for the polls, but I don't necessarily see anything where it's like Democratic Party, sponsors and encourages people to vote, or electioneers with the tacos. Like, did the tacos have vote Democrats on them? Were there vote Democrat signs on the food that were being given out to the people in line?
I guess there were advocates or whatever, but again, it wasn't like it was throughout the state.
Well, throughout the state of Georgia, there's many rural areas that probably don't have lines.
Law,
there are probably many areas in Georgia.
The law, but I think that they didn't need it. I don't think they needed the law, and as far as passed in Georgia or anywhere else, for that matter. I mean, there were only three states that did it, but now New York has rescinded theirs. But again, I agree that that's a stupid law, but I don't think it suppresses anybody from voting. But I also don't think that it's needed.
But
we're adults. If we're voting in line, my kid wants to bring me a bottle of water, then you should be able to bring me a bottle of water.
Okay. We agree on that point, so that's good.
Whatever I want.
But a lot of the times when we talk about these laws in general, it's not just specifically about each singular provision of the law in and of themselves. A lot of times you have situations like, the ability of, the state to be able to come in and overrule a decision made by a county election board. The state legislature, which is controlled by the Republicans, can say, hey, we're gonna put in a special commissioner, or we're gonna overturn what you decided because we don't like it. Now there's no specific examples of how this would be implemented. All I can do right now is to guess how they might do it, and then I might give some suggestions as to what they might do in order to overturn the decisions that were made by local county election boards, and which county election boards are more likely to be overturned by the state, and which county election boards are less likely to be overturned by decisions made by the state legislature in their decisions on how to implement this part of the law. And it would frankly all be conjecture at this point, but you've opened the door to allowing the state Republicans to be like, well, we don't like what happened in that district, so we're just going to overturn it. We're just going to by vote say, nope, sorry. And then it's too late.
So you're speculating.
But then when something happens, it's too late. Like they've enabled themselves to be able to do shenanigans, whatever those shenanigans might be. And if those shenanigans turn out to be ridiculous, when they do them, it's too late. They've basically taken a leash off of themselves. It's like taking the leash off of a pit bull and walking the pit bull down the street. Oh, well, the pit bull hasn't attacked anybody yet. You're only thinking that they might attack the person. So, and then when the pit bull attacks the person, it's too late.
So you want to put the elections in the hands of the federal government?
Well, that's a completely separate issue. I don't want state boards to have the power to just unilaterally, or state the legislatures to unilaterally have the power to just overturn one or the other, on a whim. Like there should be there's not well spelled out there. Like, we can act in this thing, and this is what we can do in this particular circumstance. It should be well stated. It should be well spelt out when exactly the state will have the authority to overturn a decision made by a local election board, and why.
I'll see if I can find that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Next week, I'll do that.
Okay.
And if I can't find anything, I can't find anything.
Right.
And what you're saying is, as far as the whim, will be right. And if I find something, then we'll go over it.
And again, if I'm wrong, I'm more than happy to say that I'm wrong. If I'm more than happy that it is spelled out specifically and clearly as to what they can do and what they can't do, fine. I'll admit that I'm wrong. But as far as my understanding of it, but look, people, Ripley was saying I was wrong about the water, and I'm right about the water. Now, when it comes to the federal rules, I don't think the federal government should be completely in control either of elections. However, the federal government does have the constitutional authority to pass laws that will protect people from being disenfranchised, to protect people from being denied equal protection under the law, under the 14th Amendment. So
but the John Lewis bill actually, in there, it states as far as they will take care of, as far as establishing state laws, and then states wouldn't be sovereign anymore if the federal government took over the elections, the federal elections.
Do you have like an example of what that might be? Like of the
when the states actually, it gives the power to not be able to redress as far as if there is any type of election fraud going on in any of the states, it won't be heard. It's just, that's it. It's final. And you can't do that when you have different states because corruption happens on both sides of the aisle. Well, if there's an issue, it should be able to be investigated and brought up, but the federal government says no. Plus, it will also give money to the candidates on both sides of the aisle. It will distribute campaign funds, and they're not good with money as it is, the federal government. Both sides spend money on special interests and stuff like that. Not that that money will go there, but I'm just saying as far as them being able to be in charge of campaign money and give it to which comes out of our tax dollars. So we have to pay basically to support these candidates in that manner versus, candidates going out and raising money. And so that's in there. I didn't agree with that. There's another issue, but I can't remember right now. I don't want to take up all your time. I did want to mention, though, quickly, the voter registration as far as the 2 years. If you don't vote in 2 years, you'll be dropped from the voter registration list.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to vote again, then you can re-register. California has had that on their books forever. That's what happens here. You have to clear the voter rolls, clean them. And it's not just because of people that maybe have moved, but people die, and so they clean those rolls. And so basically 2 elections, if you don't vote in 2 election cycles, you get dropped, and then you have to re-register. And so I don't consider that voter suppression. I mean, a lot of states have that rule.
Well, there are some states that have implemented things like if you didn't one of the ones, I honestly forget which state it was, but there is a state that basically said if you don't vote in a singular election, that we can drop you from the rolls, which I think is absurd. And I said earlier in the show, if you're dead, sure, you should be purged from the voting list. If you've moved, sure, you should be purged from the voting list. There are legitimate reasons to purge people from voting lists. There are also things that, like, if we want to go way back to 2000, one of the first examples of voter purges that was, nationally publicized, there was Catherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State of Florida at the time, cast a wide net when it came to who was removed from the list and who wasn't removed from the list. And that wide net eliminated many people who were false positives. And if you looked at all the false positives after the fact, and if those people tried to vote and weren't able to vote because there were no provisional ballots at the time, that it might very well have made up the difference in the results of the election. When a false positive takes place, to me, you should be required to notify the person of the positive, so that person can say, hey, this is a false positive. I still live here. Let me know that you've purged me. But they're not required to let you know that you were purged. And one of the results of what happened in 2000, which is a federal requirement on allowing for provisional ballots. So if you go to vote and people say you're not allowed to vote, but you insist that you are allowed to vote, you get to cast a provisional ballot, and then those provisional ballots are checked. And so that's one way that the federal government used their 14th Amendment powers to curb the ability of states to deny people the right to cast a ballot if you're casting a provision. But you had in this example that I read earlier was that somebody was given a provisional ballot not because she was purged from the rolls, but because the line to vote was so long that by the time she actually made it through the line and into cast her ballot, they turned off the voting machines, and the only way she had to vote was to cast a provisional ballot, at which point, again, whether or not they counted it, how do you know? So to me, you shouldn't be turning off the voting machines until everybody has cast their ballot.
She was in line. I don't know why they shut the voting machines off. Right. That doesn't make sense because you wait till the last person in line. I worked the polls. Right. But
there shouldn't be such lines to begin with anyway. If you have so many people in a particular area, and I know our friend from up north has said before that has said, well, then, he thinks that it should be that's your choice to live in a well-packed area. But if you have such long lines, maybe one of the things that should be done is you should expand the number of precincts that you have, expand the number of voted polling places that you have, so there are not such long lines. You should eliminate long lines, or make other ways of voting available so that people don't have to wait in line. For example, like in Louisiana, we have early voting for 2 weeks, and that's one of the things that the federal legislation wants to do, is enable early voting for 2 full weeks consecutive, including Sundays. They want it to be enabled, so that every state should be required to implement that, so that people have more time to cast their ballot, and that would alleviate some of the problems with people waiting online. And one of the other ways that people could easily cast a ballot without having to wait online is using a mail-in ballot. There are some states that are 100% mail-in ballot, and that's fine. But the problem is that you have several states who were like, well, mail-in ballots, they're sure problematic because we lost, even though some of the Florida, which seems to be really clamping down on mail-in ballots, Trump won Florida. So I don't know what exactly their problem is with it, because it didn't help Biden win Florida. But there are plenty of people who cast legitimate ballots, including people who serve overseas in the military, and they should have their votes counted, and there's nothing wrong with them casting a ballot that's a mail-in vote, and there should be nothing wrong with anybody else if they just. I've heard Republicans and conservatives talk about that you should only be able to vote on election day. But that just is going to create more problems, not less. It's like, want to take it to the absurd. Well, let's limit voting to only between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. on election day, and that's it. And if you're not in line, if you haven't voted between that time, then you don't get to vote. Like, it's an absurd argument, but again, it's why not give people more opportunities to vote? Why not expand the ability of people to be able to have the time to cast a ballot? Why are they fighting so hard to prevent ways of voting?
The states that had closed some of the polls for people in their districts or areas they extended their early voting, or they gave an extra day for voting, so to eliminate long lines. Let me see what state they did. So there were, when they did one thing, they took away one thing, they, as you said, compensated in other ways, but nobody talks about those things, the compensations, in order to make it better. I mean, as far as the voting goes, there may not have been enough people to have that poll open anymore. I don't know what the reasons were that they had changed the laws, but I know that there were enacted extra early days to vote, so that there were times to do it, and also help to eliminate the long lines.
Well, here's one of my examples of my what ifs, of my speculations of Georgia. One of the things that the new SB 202 did in Georgia was to basically say, when it came to early voting, that polling places were required to be open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It also said that a district could also be, extend their hours in each district, in each county, could say, okay, well, we're going to decide to be open from 7 to 7 instead of just from 9 to 5. We're going to choose to be open from 7 to 7, right? So what happens, let's say several counties say, okay, we think 7 to 7 is a good idea. And we have some conservative counties that do it. We have some liberal counties that do it. So what is to prevent the Georgia Republicans in the legislature from saying, we don't agree with Fulton County being open from 7 to 7. We only want them to be open from 9 to 5, so we're going to overturn their decision. What's to stop that?
I don't know. We were going to talk about that next week, as far as what safeguards were put in there.
Right. So
I can't answer that right now.
Right. But that's one of the examples of I was having problems thinking of an example of something that we could both look into. So next week we could have that discussion. That's one example of something that I would bring up, is that I'm basically, so I'm not just saying look blindly for these things. Here's one example of one of my concerns when it comes to the voter ID law, or the so-called voter ID laws that are being passed, which many provisions have nothing to do with the requirement to show an ID to vote. Hey, I'm all for, I'm all for it. Let's pass a nationwide law. Say everybody gets a free voter ID. It's a picture ID, has your name on it. It's linked to a database. You show it when you want to vote, or you scan it when you want to submit your electronic vote or whatever, or your whatever, however method you're going to cast the ballot is. Use this ID. It allows you to vote. Boom, you're done. And then you don't have to worry about it. Then it's taken off the table. I'm all for that. But again, one of my reasons but they don't bring up these so-called voter ID laws just to implement voter IDs. They make this voter ID law seem like it's a much more problematic thing than it really is, because of the voter fraud that takes place, very few of it would be fixed with the requirement to show an ID. But they've managed to convince people that the lack of a voter ID requirement in certain states is such a problem that it needs to be dealt with. Meanwhile, they shove all this other crap in these laws that say, okay, well, sorry, that they just shove it under the rug there and say, oh, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, so to speak. So.
Okay.
so that's just. And again, and very happy that nobody in the chat has said, well, what's wrong with requiring a voter ID? Because almost every time I have a conversation, somebody tends to type out somewhere, wherever I make the argument about the so-called voter ID laws, they're, what's wrong with requiring it? If they don't listen to me, because if they would have listened to me, they said, I have no problem with requiring a voter ID. I have a problem with the other provisions in these laws. Because these other provisions in these law are specifically done with the intent of keeping black people from. And there's many examples where Republicans have been on record saying we do better when black people don't vote as much. We want less people voting. Low voter turnout is good for the Republicans. High voter turnout is bad for Republicans.
Who said that? Give me an example. Who said that?
What? Specifically. Okay, well, I'll give those to you next week. Although I have discussed that on the show previously, I'll give those to you next week as well. So that's fine.
Okay. As far as, because there were areas, as far as in Georgia, where they would say that there's voter suppression in certain districts and stuff like that, but not every district, or not all districts, or not even what district in any state is completely all black or all white. There's a mixed basket of all. So any of these laws that are being passed affects everybody, and not just a certain group of people.
A large portion of the black vote in Georgia tends to be centered around Atlanta. But it
still affects other people as well too. Whether it's a large part of a group or not, there are other people affected as well. So it doesn't make any sense to say that they're trying to suppress a certain specific group, because then they're also suppressing everybody else as well who also lives in that area.
Well, to get into the but if you have like 85% of a district or county as black voters, or 85% of the district as Democratic voters, let's say, even if it's not racially based, if it's like 85% of a district is Democratic versus Republican, like in Fulton and some of these other areas in Atlanta, Cobb County or whatever, it may affect some of your voters, but it's disproportionately going to affect the other people's voters. So that's the thing. They don't care if some of their voters are have to struggle to cast a ballot if it's more of the other guys' voters that are having to struggle to cast a ballot. So I think in one of the Stop the Coup or one of the GOP coup videos that I did, it talked about how many people from each party were affected by the purge, let's say, or were affected by the changes in the rules when it came to what type of voter registration, like the exact match policy that Kemp wanted to implement initially when he was taking in new voter registrations, and he had like, I think, was it 70,000 if I'm remembering correctly, voter registrations just sitting on his desk because they didn't exactly match 100% for some reason or another. They were just sitting on the desk and nothing was done with them. You know, does that mean that are there going to be some people who were denied the ability to vote because who would have voted for Kemp? Maybe. But if what he's doing disproportionately affects the people that would vote for Stacey Abrams, then it has a net benefit to him. So,
well, do you know if those voters were notified or not, or do you just know that they were just sitting on his desk?
I do not believe that they were notified. I could be wrong, but I do not believe that they were notified that there was not a match. So.
Okay, usually they have to notify the people in those cases because then they require them to come in and sign a new card or something.
Well, I know when they cast a ballot, like if they cast a ballot and they have to what they call cure the ballots, they will notify the people who mail in their absentee ballots, for example, if they have to be cured in order to basically say, oh, this signature doesn't match the one you have on file, come in and, you know, verify that you did indeed cast this ballot and whatever to make sure. That's required by law, but notify bad voter registration. Let's see if that can come up. I'm not seeing it off the top of my head with the registration. It's bringing up a lot of purge information, but not registration information. So I'll have to do it. If I remember to, I'll have to do a deeper dive on that one as well.
Okay.
Let me see. Let me. Where's that link? I want to bring that up since I have you on the horn. Where's the bookmarks? Being a pain in my neck. Bookmarks. For some reason, I think it's in my mobile bookmarks. There we go. Waiting for this page to load. I think it was on my desktop. Was it this? No, it wasn't that. Trying to see. I forget what I named it as. Document. There it is. Okay. So going back to, I don't know if I took a screenshot of the 2 weeks ago, but 12/25, remember December 25th, as of December 29th, all deaths involving COVID were 1,646. I believe as of the last show, it was like up to 4,000, right? Am I right? That it was up to 4,000 deaths that were involving COVID? When we were talking. Do you remember that?
So, yeah.
All right. So now, as of 1/12/2022, so as of today, the all deaths involving COVID-19, it's now up to 6,811 for deaths that on the week of December 25th. So I think I did say that we should expect to see about 1,500 to 2,000 more cases being added if the trends were to continue as they had in previous weeks. And it does in fact appear that, you know, that has happened, that we went from 4,000 something to 6,811. So since December 29th, which is what, 3 weeks ago now, or 2 weeks ago.
Wait a minute. Let's see here. I'm showing January 8th.
Right, January 8th is
2,688.
Right, 2,668. January 1st is 5,360, and December 25th is 6,811. So
okay.
So
it's still going down.
So no, but those December 25th numbers are still going up. So those numbers are still coming in. So where, you know,
but the 18th was 8,000. And the week before that was 8,000, and the week before that was 8,000.
Well, the 18th is 8. Well, the 18th is 8,000, but 2 weeks ago the 18th was 4,900. See what I'm saying? So the amount of in 2 weeks.
Allowing that time frame, yes. But I mean, for that week total.
But the totals haven't finished coming in yet. That's my point.
Yeah, they have them.
No, the totals for the 18th as of today are 8,273, but the totals for the 18th back on December 29th was 4,915 because I took the screenshot. So between
well, yeah, but that's when we were looking at it.
But that's what I'm saying is that the numbers aren't necessarily going down. It looks like the numbers have went up now. So if you look at November 13th, 6,918, November 20th, 7,000, November 27th, 7,467, December 4th, 8,139, December 11th, 8,600, and as we've seen in the past 2 weeks, let's see, December 4th, 2 weeks ago was at 7,399. So it increased by 800 in those last 2 weeks for December 4th. December 11th in the last 2 weeks went from 6,776 to 8,600, so almost 2,000. So like 1,824 maybe? Yeah, 1,824 ballots. 1,824 new deaths were added to the week ending December 11th totals in the past 2 weeks than what was had. So you had 1,800 added to the 11th. You had in 2 weeks. You had in 2 weeks for December 4th. You had 800. So 1,000 more people came in the past week for the 11th than did for the 4th. So the numbers coming in for the 4th are trickling down and they're getting less and less, but you still had more numbers coming in for the 11th. So, and they're still coming in. So, and for the 18th, you had 4,915 versus 8,200. So that's almost 4,000 deaths that came in the last 2 weeks between December 18th and now. And so again, you still might see more deaths coming in next week for December 18th, and then for December 20th. So what I'm saying is that you were looking at the numbers on the 29th and saying, look, our deaths are decreasing. I'm now looking at the numbers as of right now and saying, no, they're not. They have not been decreasing. And I'll bet that since we had in the last 2 weeks between for the 25th, you had 5,200 or so come in the last 2 weeks, but you also had it was 4,000 and maybe 2,000. Maybe it was 3,500 and 2,000 come in between last week and this week. So I'm thinking you might get an additional 1,200, 1,000 to 1,200 more people next week. So I wouldn't be surprised if next week, if we look at these same numbers, if we're going to see December 25th get up to 8,000 as well. And again, for the go ahead. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, and when you continue to look at the charts, deaths involving pneumonia only, for the week of December 11th, 7,906. The week of December 18th, 7,464. Christmas week was 5,993. And so we have these numbers with people dying of just pneumonia only.
Okay.
Without COVID.
Right.
So as far as those numbers go, they're pretty close to the ones involving COVID. And it's just pneumonia, not involving anything else but pneumonia.
And those numbers are also increasing. Like, for example, the December 25th numbers for pneumonia was 1,441 versus now 5,993 for the same date because more information has come in. So,
but I'm just saying, as far as there's still a lot of deaths occurring from other things other than COVID, and it's spreadable, like the flu.
But is pneumonia is now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as pneumonia is more something that you get because of something else, right? Like you might get pneumonia if you get a cold or something. You might get pneumonia if you get a flu. You might get pneumonia if something else happens to your lungs that might not even be. We can look at causes of pneumonia just to be sure.
So why don't we, as far as mandate vaccines for cold and flu, so that people won't die from pneumonia.
Well, I think that if we lived in a country that didn't have to, that was more altruistic, I would say. And I guess we don't live in a country that, I don't believe we live in a country that's altruistic, because of the fact that we have only 4% of the world's population, but 15% of the world's deaths when it comes to COVID-19. I think there's something very wrong here where people just don't want, there's a certain subsection of people that don't want to do what's needed to do. There are countries like, I think Japan is one of the countries where when it becomes like flu season, people will wear masks just because they don't want to get anybody else sick if they happen to be sick. And it's just culturally what they do. I'd have no problem if we decided as a country, without even the requirement of a law, if we said, hey, it's cold and flu season, remember to go wear your mask when you go out in public to make it less likely for the flu to spread. That'd be wonderful for people to do. I'd love to see people do it. But they won't, because of the insane paranoia that people have over these, government simply asking them to wear a mask. They get insulted if you just ask them to wear a mask. It'd be great if we didn't have to have government tell us to do the right thing. If we all just did the right thing to keep ourselves from spreading sickness to other people. But we don't want to be bothered.
Don't you think it's odd as far as all the deaths from involving COVID and then all the deaths involving pneumonia, and as far as the influenza deaths only, those influenza deaths are really low, those numbers. But usually, in order to get pneumonia, you will get the flu or a cold to catch pneumonia. And the pneumonia numbers are keeping up with the COVID deaths, with all deaths involving COVID. They're real close. They're like right behind each other, which I find very interesting. That they're not marked COVID, they're marked pneumonia, but yet they're really close to the numbers involving COVID.
Well, if you look at the column right next to it, there are deaths from COVID, there are deaths of pneumonia, and so then you have the other column, deaths involving COVID and pneumonia. So like of the 50, currently we were looking at the week, December 25th, you had 6,800 of COVID deaths, 5,900, almost 6,000 pneumonia deaths, and 3,900 of those deaths were both. So 39, the intersection of those two columns was 3,916. There were less deaths involving influenza, but maybe some of those, maybe you had, deaths involving pneumonia, influenza, or COVID. Let's see. So if you look at this,
it's like the numbers don't seem to add up.
Let's see, 5, 7. Oh, let's see, 5, 9. I'm not sure what that. I'd have to look at that last column to figure out what they're trying to say with the last column. But
yeah, that just doesn't make sense.
But it's possible. It's possible that they might have had the flu.
I'm just
it's possible that it's possible that they might have had the flu and the flu went away, but the pneumonia stayed. So it's possible that when they died, they were just diagnosed with pneumonia, even though they might have had the flu earlier. That might be why you see some discrepancy of the numbers. It's not necessarily because you can get pneumonia from bacteria. You can get pneumonia from fungus. You can get pneumonia from many other different ways.
Okay, but that's still a lot of people dying from pneumonia only.
Right, but it's not necessarily. But it's not necessarily something that's as preventable as COVID. Even though the COVID pneumonia deaths are preventable, if you would prevent the COVID from taking place. So if you look at pneumonia deaths, let's see if we go back to 20. Let's go back to 2019. I think you can scroll all the way back to. No, you can only go back to 2020. But like January 4th.
You can get pneumonia from COVID because COVID is a respiratory virus.
Right, you can. You're right, but just because you have pneumonia, you can get it from non-viral means. You can get it from a bacterial infection. You can get it from a fungal infection. So you could have mold in your house from Hurricane Ida, for example, and breathe in the mold from your house and then get pneumonia, and it has nothing to do with COVID.
I totally understand.
Right. So
I totally get that.
Right,
but the thing is the number the numbers are astounding that many people would have fungus or mold and bacteria all at the same time to create, almost within a small margin, about 10% margin between the COVID death and pneumonia. I mean, that's where my issue is. I mean, sure, there's different things that that can subject you to getting pneumonia, and also how vulnerable you are medically. But the numbers are just so close, and to say that many people had those issues to involve death with pneumonia that is so close to the same amount of COVID. It's just, and I'm not saying anything other than just what I'm saying is that it's just the numbers are just really weird that they're so close together. It's not to dispute the numbers. I'm just saying it's just odd how many people died of pneumonia.
Sure, and I think we'd have to, I think I'd like to look at maybe even further years in the past. So I think we go all the way back to 2020 because, like, January 4th, 2020, there was 0 deaths with COVID. They've said January 11th, 2020, there was 1 death with COVID, and back then you had 4,000 deaths involving pneumonia back then for just the week of January 4th. So the first week of
treat pneumonia
right
with antibiotics, but nobody was making such a big whoopee-doo about it then. If there were large numbers, then I don't know. I'll take your word for it, which is fine.
Well, you just got to scroll down.
Nobody was saying, how come, 8,000 people are dying a day or a week or whatever,
It's probably because, I mean, if I had to say anything, it's probably because pneumonia can be caused by so many different things that, okay, you have so many pneumonia deaths from this, you have so many pneumonia deaths from that, and then it's an average, I guess, and if you have a kind of a baseline of we expect to have this many people getting pneumonia every week and dying from pneumonia every week, then it doesn't become as shocking as, oh well, it's back in April of 2020 and we've had 10,000 COVID deaths when it was just 3,000 the week before. That becomes more shocking, and of course that also caused. But that also caused, like, so you did see, for example, like if you're on that same chart, you go back to April 18th, 2020, the COVID deaths in a week was 17,203, and the deaths from pneumonia went up to 11,415 versus like a couple months before when it was only at about 4,000. So yeah, the increase of COVID did spur the increase of pneumonia deaths.
But that's not showing deaths. I'm not talking about the number of deaths with COVID and pneumonia. I'm just talking about pneumonia.
Right, but I mean, the number of
for COVID and pneumonia.
But the number of pneumonia deaths went up because the number of pneumonia deaths involving COVID went up. So, for example, the week of April 18th, 2020, you had 17,000 COVID deaths. You had 11,000 pneumonia deaths. Of those 11,000 pneumonia deaths, 7,000 of them, 7,300 were COVID and pneumonia. So the pneumonia deaths without COVID was 4,000, was about 4,100, which is about the same as what you were seeing earlier in the year. January 4th, 4,000 pneumonia deaths, 4,100, 4,150, 11th, 4,000 on the 18th, 3,900, 3,800, 3,800, 3,800, 3,700, 3,800. So you saw for the first 3 months of 2020, the deaths involving pneumonia were kind of a standard for right at about 4,000, and then once COVID hit, you got a spike in number. You had almost triple the amount of deaths of pneumonia. That's because 2/3 of those pneumonia deaths were pneumonia with COVID. So COVID is what was driving much of the increase of pneumonia deaths in those weeks. So it's not necessarily that strange to see those numbers happen because you're seeing higher numbers because you're seeing higher numbers of COVID.
But the numbers involving COVID, the numbers in those columns, if you go to the bottom of that chart, it adds them up separately. So keep scrolling.
Like I'm looking at, there's the total columns. There are the total columns.
Weekly, monthly. Okay.
But I'm looking at each week. So I scroll down to April 18th. This is the one I happened to pick out because it was a high COVID death week. So you look at the high COVID deaths, you see in the first column 17,000 deaths involving COVID, and regardless of what else was what happened. And then that same week you also had 11,000 deaths involving pneumonia, regardless of the cause of the pneumonia. But in that same week you had 7,300 deaths involving COVID and pneumonia, meaning there was about 4,100 pneumonia deaths that were not COVID related, and so almost double the amount of deaths that were COVID related of pneumonia. So that's why you're seeing more pneumonia deaths than you normally would, is because you're seeing more COVID deaths, because COVID causes pneumonia and can cause you to die from pneumonia.
So you're subtracting the amount of COVID plus pneumonia from the COVID deaths?
No, I'm just trying to
figure out how you got those numbers. That's all.
I'm subtracting the number of COVID and pneumonia from the total pneumonia deaths. So to find the total number of pneumonia deaths that were not COVID related, take the total number of deaths of pneumonia column, take the total deaths of pneumonia, and then subtract the total deaths of COVID and pneumonia. So you find the number of pneumonia deaths that have nothing to do with COVID. So it's so you find more than double the deaths, or about maybe a little less than double, about double the deaths that were of the deaths involving pneumonia. About 2/3 of them were relating to COVID, and 1/3 of them were your standard 4,000 a week or so regular pneumonia deaths. So if you look at like,
but the columns state exactly how many people died from what, and it's not broken down into, at the end of the chart. If you go across, it's not broken at the end to say, okay, so this is what the number is, an actual, that brought as far as the numbers between the pneumonia and COVID separate.
Well, they have COVID and pneumonia. You have the date column.
All deaths involving this. All deaths involving this.
You have the date column. You have the date column. You have the deaths involving COVID column. Then deaths from all causes. Then the percent of deaths expected. Then you have deaths involving pneumonia just as a whole. Then the next column is deaths involving COVID and pneumonia. So to find out how many deaths involved pneumonia that didn't include COVID, you would just subtract the the sixth column from the fifth column to figure out how many of those deaths were pneumonia but not COVID related. And that's what I'm saying, where at the beginning of the year, before COVID really took hold, you had around 4,000 deaths. Pretty standard. It looks like it's pretty standard. 4,000 deaths around every month, every week. Every week you're seeing about 4,000 deaths from pneumonia before COVID hits. Then COVID starts to hit, and you start seeing more. It's like the first time you got triple-digit COVID deaths. You had 588 COVID deaths. You had 257 of those were COVID deaths with pneumonia. So you went up from your average of 4,000 to now 4,500. The very next week, you had 3,200 COVID deaths. Of those, about 1,500 were COVID and pneumonia. So instead of having, so the overall pneumonia deaths were 6,100, but subtract the COVID and pneumonias, and you'll get around 4,500. Again, if you have the next week, you have even more COVID deaths, and you have more deaths with COVID and pneumonia. Subtract the 9,900 overall pneumonia deaths, and then subtract from that the COVID and pneumonia, you have 4,200. So again, you're still at the non-COVID pneumonia deaths are pretty standard. So what's causing more people to die of pneumonia during the COVID-19 pandemic is COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a driving factor, which is causing us to see more pneumonia deaths than we normally would. And I'm wondering how that will keep up with Omicron. I'm wondering how that will keep up. And I'm glad you showed me this chart, because we'll be able to go through the weeks and see, okay, these are the amount of deaths that we're seeing. But again, and I don't think it's too soon. I think it's too soon to be saying that we have final numbers on the December 25th one. Clearly, I think we're going to get up to maybe 8,000 again. I think by the time, 2 weeks from now, I bet you 2 weeks from now that number of all deaths involving COVID is going to hit 8,000 at least, to match up with the rest of the ones, which will just show that weren't decreasing in deaths. It was just staggered numbers coming in. But again, as of right now, deaths involving pneumonia at this point is 6,000. Deaths involving COVID and pneumonia is 4,000. So as of right now, we're at 2,000 deaths that are pneumonia non-COVID related. So I'm betting we're also going to see those numbers increase as well to put us to a point where we'll have, if we have 8,200 or 8,400 or whatever it gets to above 8,000, we're probably going to see a little bit more deaths involving COVID and pneumonia to get us to the point where we still have the non-COVID pneumonia deaths hovering around that average of 4,000 that we see every week.
Okay. Now, since May of 2020, that was like the final month where we had two-digit numbers, COVID deaths only. From there...
Well, May 2020. Okay, let me scroll down. Okay. Well, May 2020, we had 13,000 deaths of COVID. You're talking
May 9th, the week of May 9th.
May 9th, we had 11,000. We had five. We're in 5 digits. You mean above 10,000?
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
5 digits.
Yeah.
May 9th, and then from there. Now the numbers fluctuated. It went down to 9, and then 7, and then 6, and we know that later on it spiked back up to 8, and then 7, 6 throughout. And then as we continue to move through the year of 2020, in October 31st, 2020, and then we spiked again,
right,
in December,
right,
and those were like major numbers,
right,
that we had there for December 2021. But then those numbers after February 2021, they came down again as far as the numbers are holding steady until August 2021. And they spiked back up. But it seems like we are having, like 6-month periods where they're dropping down under 4 digits versus the 5, which is good.
Sure, but 2 weeks ago when you were bringing me the data, you were like, "Oh, look, we're only at 1,600 deaths this week for COVID," and I was like, "Yeah, but I'm going to bet that we're going to get more numbers. I'm going to bet that more numbers are going to come in at that point, and we're going to see higher. It's going to be higher in the next few weeks." So, and that did happen, because over the last 2 weeks we've gotten the 4,200-ish more
yes.
deaths from that
and
week.
I agree.
Right. So that's what I'm saying.
I said, as far as that significant, I was as far as misspoke when I said significant. But as far as since October 31st, the numbers still seem to be holding steady as far as below that 4-digit number in the downward spiral. And we both had agreed that let's hope that it continues that way. We're still waiting for more numbers. And then, of course, Omicron, those numbers haven't come in yet too. So,
and what will be interesting to see, is that, is that if maybe Omicron doesn't kill you in and of itself, but I'm wondering how many people are going to get pneumonia from Omicron. Wonder how that's going to work. Wonder how that's going to change the figures much.
They'll probably spike. I'm betting they'll probably spike.
Probably.
Because you can get pneumonia from the cold, yeah.
Right. So you can get pneumonia from the cold, but I mean, again, COVID's not the cold, but it gives you cold-like symptoms, in many times. But we don't know what long-term exposure to Omicron's going to be. We don't know what,
From what I understand, it exhibits cold-like symptoms.
Right.
The respiratory, sneezing, coughing,
achy, stuffy head, fever, so you could rest.
So that would, because it's a ear, nose, mouth type situation, that's usually goes into the lungs.
Right.
Because you have the throat.
Right.
And so
which
that's why
then means
probably spike.
You're probably going to see more pneumonia, which is going to suck. And that's one of the reasons why we need to do the right thing and be socially distanced more often and mask more often and do all the things that people should be doing to protect their neighbors. But unfortunately, we're going to have a large segment of society that is going to just say no to that every single time because their so-called freedoms trump, or their desire to not be inconvenienced trumps the rights of everybody else. So
their autonomy.
But you shouldn't have the autonomy to make other people sick. My ability to swing my fist stops well before it hits your face. So I do not have the right to threaten to hit you. I do not have the right to put you at risk. I do not have the right to drive dangerously, even if I want to drive dangerously. I don't have the right to act irresponsibly. I shouldn't have the right to act irresponsibly in the middle of COVID, and I shouldn't feel that I'm entitled to do so. I would hope that everybody, would say, look, I have the autonomy to act as certain ways, and the way that I'm going to act is that I'm going to make sure that I'm going to protect my fellow human beings and do things what the experts say. Unfortunately, we have people in Congress who just want to fire the experts and not want to do anything. But I am going to go ahead and I'm going to make this only a 2-hour show. But, definitely we'll call back in next week. We'll maybe look up some of those examples that we were talking about, and, definitely discuss those more voter suppression stuff as well as taking other people's calls. Again, this is the end of this week's episode of Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right. Tune in every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, blogtalkradio.com/LiberalDan, or here on YouTube, youtube.com/LiberalDanRadio. Follow me at Liberal Dan Radio on Facebook, Liberal Dan on Facebook, at Liberal Dan Radio on Twitter, and on TikTok. And please support the Patreon and Stop the Coup as well. StopTheCout.LiberalDan.com, as well as Patreon.com/LiberalDan. Until next week, this is Dan Zimmerman with Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.